Now on the bench we have the Mini Maxx, and where I ran it last time it wasn't sounding good and it weren't steering great to start with. Then it cleared up, so I'm going to give it a full strip down, clean, grease and back together. Probably rebind the ESC and all that to see if that helps it, because it does suffer from a stutter. This BL2S system, I think it is. Yeah, I think I know what the S stands for. It's not up to the quality of a normal brushless. Well, after one of the bad landings on the last run, the brace I downloaded broke. But what I'm doing is I'm printing a new one, but I've made it 1mm thicker, so it'll be 3 instead of 2, just that little bit stronger. So hopefully that's a bit better. Yeah, but it was a bad landing, that didn't help. So we've got that to refit on when I've got a new one. When I was checking the gearing, I noticed, if you can see it, you can see where it's been running on the gear. So I've slightly adjusted it so it's a better match up with the gear, because it was off. So hopefully that's a better mesh, which I think will hopefully might make it a bit quieter. We don't know. Literally I'm trying everything I can think of. The motor seems okay. I've not spun it up yet. There don't seem to be any dirt, but I don't know how to take it apart to give it a proper clean. Working to get the servo out of the way, what a royal pain. But I think the way to do it is I'm going to release off the front bulkhead and then undo the servo. It's the only way I can think of doing it. So we'll try that to hopefully split it. But I'm going to take a screw out the steering. That will release that part of the servo. And like I said, if I undo the other screws and release the front, I should be able to, well, I can get to them, but they're so hard to get to release the servo. Having the servo fixed in that way is a royal pain. I'm going to be truthful. See? But you can't take the servo out really unless you remove the rear gearbox. Luckily these screws are not too long. But it's the first time I've took it this far apart. But it needs a good clean, because when I was up at Wesley's the time before, it was gritty up there. So, well, the servo moves. Now we'll take out these hopefully last couple of screws. Because somebody said it's not that easy to work on. It isn't as easy, but it's not bad. I'm going to be truthful. You know, because I'm going to clean the middle and then work backwards. The only thing is, where I've been in water, I did notice one thing. I've got slightly rusty bearings, but they will be cleaned. It's not a big issue. Right, we took those screws from there. What am I missing? Oh, there's 2 screws lower down. Like I said, you can tell I've not had this apart. But it's a good way of cleaning it, is you do this and you put it back together the same way you take it apart. So you keep it in the right order, but most of the stuff does seem the same. Because I think splitting it as much as possible straight away is probably the way to go. Which it might not be it. There must be one screw in the front here. Try this one. Yeah, that's the last screw. So that's going to be the easiest way to work on this half the time. To split it is literally, well, I was going to say drop the servo off. It's not really needed because that has separated. So I can put the servo back on. That's not a problem. That's pretty good. But it is learning as you go along. But I'll give it a clean out first before I do that. But yeah, it's not too bad work on, but basically take 4 screws out here, 1 at the front, and this whole thing comes off. Well, it's 6 in all if you count the steering. So it's not bad to get apart. Now I've got the main parts back together of the centre. The servo, like I said, can stay in to work on it in future. I didn't realise that. It's just 1 screw. The only thing I don't like is this cover where it's just jammed up inside the receiver and the wires are just bunched underneath. Not really a fan of that at all, but it's in there secure again. I've been working on the front. I've re-greased the front diff, which is fine. The only first breakage I have found on the car, considering the bashing this has had, was 1 shock absorber. It was a slightly popped cap, but the shaft was bent. I've straightened it as best I can. It's not perfect, but they've always been weak and you often have to straighten them. So I'm going to get all the front back on and then we'll look to see what's anything in the rear. But like I said, for the pounding it's taken, it's in pretty good nick. Now I'm going to try and zoom in on the gear. If you can see on this gear, there's a bit of wear where it's off centre, and I've adjusted the gear so it hopefully meshes better on it. I don't know, I will check it more, but what I've done is I've set up the power. I'm going to check the motor's okay, that it's just quiet when it runs. Well, there's nothing wrong with the motor making noise or anything. So all I can do is put it back together again and again and again until I'm happy. Yeah, they didn't make this easy to line up. But what I might do is I'm going to take the rear end off again. It's a pain. But what my theory is you might be able to mesh the gear from underneath to get it exact, because it definitely wasn't correct. So let's try that. I'll get it apart because I'm not going to bother with that, but let's rip this off because most of the screws are out anyway and it's not a lot more. There we go, the gearbox is off. Now let's take the engine cover and have a see if we can see a bit better. There you go. If you take the rear gearbox off like this, you can have a look. Just got to get it to, I want to make sure it's lined up properly. Why aren't you going in? It might be just, actually it fits over the chassis so I shouldn't worry. But as you can clearly see, if you need to mesh this properly, there's literally, take the gearbox off. Then you can put in a screwdriver. Yeah, and wiggle it into place. People says you can't get, it's hard to work the mesh out. Well, take the gearbox off, or the rear, well sorry, take the rear diff off, and you can line it up. You've just seen me do it. Line the diff up, no trouble at all. And what I know that is the perfect mesh. So all I've got to do now is take the motor out and put the gearbox back, the diff back on. And that should be spot on. So let's get it back together and spin her over. So there we go. though I was saying that it was properly meshed, what I should say is the pinion's exactly lined up with the spur gear, is the correct terminology. Because like I said, where the cover fits on, it's hard to tell. But you can also do that to make sure that it is meshed properly, or near as, that it's not too tight or anything. It is a way of trying. So let's give it some power and see what it's like. Well, I have to say the meshing system is terrible, because that sounds awful. That's why these are so noisy. The mesh is, it must be terrible on these, because there's no way that should be screaming quite like that. I don't know whether the spur is going, but that is absolutely horrid. So what I'm going to do is a little cheat. I'm going to put a smear of grease on it. It might quieten it enough, but that sounds terrible. But it explains why these have always sound noisy. But then, like I said, the spur gear does show some degradation, so it might need a new one at some time. There's the last screw. Well, there it is out. Yeah, I'm going to say there is a line round the spur gear. I'm going to bring it right up to the camera. Can you see that line? There's a little line. Well, what I'm going to do is, like I said, put a bit of grease and I'll run it until it totally dies. But I don't want too much grease on it. You get what I'm saying? Just enough to sort of hopefully quieten it a bit, but it is definitely the spur gear is going, but it's never sounded right from the start, I'll be truthful. Like I said, people always said on the thing, God, it sounds noisy. But there we go, that's a small amount of grease. I haven't gone mad. And let's whack these screws back in. But if you can't line up the pinion exactly with the spur, I don't know what's going on. Because I've never played with moving the motor or anything, it's just as is. But you can see why I'm constantly spinning it before I test it to make sure it's not grabbing or anything, because you'd feel it if you can't turn it by the rear hexes. There we go. Let's put the battery back in and see what it's like. Did you see that? If we go, this is one of the problems I've been having. Forward reverse, stop it that way, and it goes. But if you go forward, there you go, I'm pulling the trigger and there's a delay. So I'm going to check, before I take it out for a next run, I will check the settings of the endpoints to the controller to the ESC, because it could be just slightly off.